Howdy, team. Happy Thursday. I hope you guys are doing well today. I'm going to jump right in because, golly, this might be the most gospel packed lesson we've had yet. I love talking about Gomer and Hosea. In fact, it might be my favorite Old Testament story in the Bible. That's hard to pick, but golly, it's good. For starters, you might combine options one and two from the lesson. Our students love to talk about dogs. That's one thing Kate and I know for sure. And so I would bring up the point that dogs, by and large, they understand tone of voice more than they do specific words. All that really just goes with option one and understanding that how we present truth, how we present it matters just as much as what we were saying. And sometimes presentation is a big deal. But I would point out too, there are several times in the Old Testament that God makes prophets do bizarre things, and sometimes in the New Testament as well. But he asked Isaiah to walk around naked. He asked Ezekiel to lay on his side for 390 days. He asked Elijah to tell a widow, hey, give me this last bit of food even though you and your son are about to die. And it was all to make a point and to teach a greater lesson. And so sometimes our following of Jesus is going to cause us to do bizarre things, but we need to trust God in that process. And this is a great example of that too. I would point out too that a prostitute that marries somebody no longer has to be a prostitute. Prostitutes by nature were always single women. They were doing it because they seemingly had no other means of raising an income for themselves. For a prostitute to marry, that means that they were, among other things, they were gaining freedom. So the fact that Gomer continued to be a prostitute, well, that just says a lot. But rather than throwing rocks at Gomer, I would point out to the students, this is exactly what we could do with God all the time. Jesus has set us free. We no longer have to commit sin. Romans makes this abundantly clear on more than one occasion. Romans 7, Romans chapter 5, Romans chapter 6. We are free to not sin, and yet we continue to return to our sin because we are that rebellious. And so this is one of those lessons kids are going to go, man, that's crazy. There's lots of crazy stuff about this story. But God's love for us is immaculately crazy in a really, really good way. I would point out to them, too, immediately, some of them that don't know this story, when you explain to them, God told Hosea to go marry a prostitute, they're all going to go, that's nuts. I can't believe he would do that. But again, not only point out that God does crazy stuff with other prophets, but also it's pretty crazy that God chose to enter a relationship with us, take it even a further step back. God chose to create us knowing full well that we were going to be unfaithful. Every time we feel our self-righteousness in this story start to bubble up, start to have those thoughts and start to make those proclamations to the students, because that's the point. We are utterly sinful and completely rebellious, and God is incredibly faithful and good and kind and merciful and loving and all these other things that we just don't have words for. And he's that way all the time, and we're this way all the time. And yet he continues to love us. It's an amazing thing. So when you jump into chapter 2, which is, goodness gracious, just beautiful gospel description of what Jesus does for that, point that out to them. Man, this is the gospel. That Jesus, well, in this case, Hosea, who is the Christ figure in this story, Hosea would enter, it's called the Valley of Acre. It's known as the Valley of Trouble or the Valley of Sin. Hosea would enter into the Valley of Sin, and he would begin to allure, I love that language there, allure his bride. He's going to show love to his bride and display his kindness to his bride. And ultimately, he's going to pay the price that's needed for salvation to occur. And he does, and it's beautiful. And it's really, really important, too, to point this out to the students. These promises are made before Gomer ultimately just abandons her husband outright. And she probably sold herself into slavery. And those promises were made before all that. And God said, nope, I love her. God says to us, I love you, even though you continue to run away, even though you have sold yourself into slavery, even though you have rebelled at every single angle and every single way, I love you, and I'm going to pay the price. And I've made these promises to you for a long time, and at the cross, he proved for forever that he loves us. It's awesome. That last chapter 3, when Hosea goes in to literally buy his bride back, and he buys her, by the way, for 15 shekels, and then it was essentially 15 shekels worth of grain. What you need to catch from that is Hosea gave everything that he had in order to buy his bride back. He did that, number one, because God told him to. Number two, because he did love her. Number three, he showed his love to her sacrificially. He gave everything for her, just like Christ gave everything for us. But ultimately, he did it to prove that God meant what he said. I love you. No matter what you do, I love you. No matter what you do, I'm going to chase you. No matter what you do, I'm going to pursue having a relationship with you. And I will do what it takes in order for that to happen. That's what the cross forever proves. This lesson's full of the gospel, y'all. Preach it and proclaim it loudly. Love you guys. We'll see you later.